I'm very proud to welcome Kadir van Lohuizen. Kadir van Lohuizen is in the Netherlands the first photographer who won the prize of investigative journalism with his documentary on Diamonds Matter on the diamond industry. He travels to Angola, Sierra Leone, Congo, Chile, many countries. He did an amazing project via Panam, where he traveled from all the way in South America, all the way up to Alaska. And he is a founding member of NOR, an agency of investigative photographers, and is part of the supervisory board of World Press Photo. He's on his way to Lima, to the United Nations Conference on Climate Change. And we're very happy that you will present us first with what you're going to present then to the UN.
I'm very honored to be here, thank you. Yeah, I believe I'm maybe the first photographer on stage, so it feels a little bit awkward. At the same time, it's a nice profession because it actually, I discovered in my 25 career that people often don't take you very serious because you're just a photographer. So it actually gave me quite a bit of access over the years. And I want to show you a project which I concluded actually only 2 weeks ago. It's a project where I'm looking into the human consequences of the rising sea levels in the world. As often with projects, they're not born overnight. They have quite a history, and this history started in 2011, where I happened to be in Bangladesh and afterwards in Panama, where I actually noticed that it was actually not something for the future generations, but it's actually an issue which is happening right now. In Panama, they were ordering the evacuation of the first 4 islands in the area called San Blas. Many people know it as a touristic destination. And in Bangladesh, we are used to that it gets flooded. There are cyclones. It happens quite often. But usually the water was always receding. And nowadays it's not, because Bangladesh is facing a rising sea level and it's facing the melting of the glaciers in the Himalaya. So I'm a freelancer, so I'm independent, which gives me a lot of freedom, which also often causes a financial issue, because you have to pay for these adventures. If I have enough money in my account, I will buy a ticket and embark on a project, and if not, I have to find another way. So I was actually working on this already, and I was in New York. I have some friends who are editors at the New York Times, so I was there just to have a coffee actually, and they asked, what are you up to? And I said, well, I have this idea, and which doesn't happen very often. They said, we want to have that. And I said, well, okay, how serious are you? And they said, well, come back in an hour. And I came back in an hour, and there was this whole room with all the editors, foreign editors, environmental desk, picture editors. And I had to present. I had nothing prepared. And they said, you got it. So I embarked on this journey. The original plan of the New York Times was that they would send a journalist with me, the editor of the environmental desk. Before we even started, the environmental desk was dissolved at the New York Times. A little bit awkward in these times, but it happened. So, except from Bangladesh, where the correspondent for the subcontinent came with me, I was left on my own, which meant, yeah, a photographer is not just a photographer nowadays anymore. It required a lot of research. I had to be very accurate, obviously, because I know there are a lot of climate skepticals waiting to bring me down on the stories I was trying to tell. Originally, the title of the project was the working title, Where Will They Go? And I actually changed it a few weeks ago in Where Will We Go? Because obviously this is not just facing some people in the Pacific and in Bangladesh, but we will be, in the end, we will see the effects as well. I started in Greenland. Greenland is kind of, obviously, as you probably know, it's where the ice cap is melting at a very rapid rate. So I wanted to start there. The great thing for the Greenland, it's for the people in Greenland, it's partly nice because it's becoming green in the south, and they actually are growing vegetables and even strawberries nowadays. It's actually the only land which is not. It's actually Greenland is slowly coming up because of the weight of the ice cap is disappearing. So the land is actually getting higher. Obviously, in the north, it's where all the glaciers are, and I actually was wondering for a long time how it was possible that the sea level is not rising everywhere at the same height. It's different in different parts of the world. And it was only discovered a couple of years ago that actually ice has a pull factor. It pulls water towards it. So, which is actually the reason why the US East Coast has, on average, 3 times higher rise in the sea level than elsewhere in the world. Funny thing was that the New York Times first they said, well, okay, just do Bangladesh, and I tried to argue that it was a global issue. So they allowed me to travel to different places in the world, but when I mentioned that I wanted to go to the US as well, to the US East Coast, they said that they were not interested. So I said, yeah, well, I said, why not? And they said, well, it's not really happening here. This was before Sandy, by the way. So Sandy made a change, and several chapters of this project I did on my own, and most of them, in the end, were published by the New York Times as well, including the US. So what I didn't realize, and I think many don't realize, is that I was assuming that the problem starts when the water is really there. I didn't realize that the problem starts much earlier, which is when there's saltwater intrusion, it means that the soil is getting saline. It means that the water becomes undrinkable. And I've been to a number of places in the world, including the delta of Bangladesh, where if we would have been living there, we would have been evacuated a long time ago. So it's just these standards of safety we adopt, which determine how long we can actually stay. Bangladesh is going to be the biggest, probably the biggest disaster, because the problem is, as I said, where will we go? And Bangladesh is almost as flat as Holland. There's only a small hilly part on the east side, on the border with Burma. And the idea was that the people would relocate there to there, but it's a tribal area, very sensitive and very small, actually. And it's estimated that about 50 million people need to be evacuated by 2050 or 60. So honestly, no one knows where to. And India is building a wall on its border, which is part of the reason why this wall is being constructed, to avoid that Bengali will cross over. So I try, in this project, I try to link, like in Bangladesh, I went to find families who are still in the Delta and who have relatives who left already. Because people are leaving as we speak, because the government is not doing, the world community is not doing anything. So I went to track the families which are often ending up now in the slums of the big cities in Bangladesh, like Dhaka and Chittagong. When people move, there was a very steep learning curve for me as well to do this project. When people move, the people who live in the Delta, they're usually farmers and fishermen. So when they get to the cities, they don't have the skills. They can't be farmers, they can't be fishermen. So people often end up in really bad conditions where there's no support whatsoever. So her parents and his parents are still in the Delta, and he's working in a brick factory now, and she's working in a textile factory. I was using a kite often for the aerials, not a drone, because it was too complicated and too. In some countries it's really difficult, or in many countries it's really difficult now to fly the drone. So a kite works quite well, although you're a little bit depending on the wind. So that's the only hilly part, but where some people have moved to by themselves, but they will probably be sent back now. It helped that I'm Dutch. That helped a little bit. It helped often to get access. I very often heard people saying the Dutch will fix it. It helped also because, I mean, at least my generation, which was not very long after the big flood disaster we had in 1953, we grew up with the fear of the sea. Obviously, we live behind dikes, we live below sea level, the most part of the country. So we are prolonging our existence a little bit, but in the end of the day, also Holland will, for the biggest part, will not exist. Which is not a joke, because I was actually, 2 years ago, I was at the City of Amsterdam, at the Department of City Planning, and I was having a meeting with the director there. And I spoke about this project, and I said, what's Amsterdam actually? Is somebody thinking about this issue in Amsterdam? And he said, well, there's actually a small workforce, which is part of the City of Amsterdam, which is looking into the relocation of Amsterdam. And they showed me a small map where the projected coastline of the Netherlands in 2300 is at the German border. And they said that Amsterdam will probably be relocated Arnhem, which is close on the German border. Behind Arnhem will be the new Amsterdam in the future. So this is where the idea originated from, Panama. I went back to Panama last year, or actually this year. And those 4 islands I was talking about, which were supposed to be evacuated last year, were still there, because the money from the central government disappeared. So it was often going to those islands in the Pacific. It often looks like a postcard from a distance, and when you come close, it actually very often turned into hell, because people are really desperate. They're becoming more desperate. When I was here in 2011. Everybody said, well, it's just the government is trying to get us off these islands because it's an indigenous population. They're trying to influence our lives. They want to control us. So they made up this plan, this story of that the sea was coming. Now everybody was lining up to leave. So there is a strip of mainland where people will have to be evacuated to. As I said, the money disappeared, so this is where the homes need to be constructed, but it's still empty land. As I mentioned, food is often becoming a problem. This is a group of atolls called the Carteret Atolls, which is off the coast of Papua New Guinea. And it was the only place where I was really hungry for a week, because there were only coconuts. There was hardly any fish. Often the problem with these atolls is that the lagoon, which looks very nice and blue, in reality is heavily polluted, and there's hardly any fish to be found. Outside is the Pacific, and it's with the small boats, if they have, is far too rough to sail on and fish. So people often, they take initiative in their own hands. Same here, the government promised them to relocate them. It hasn't happened, and there's local people now who set up a foundation and are evacuating the first families themselves. They're trying to find funding. They're trying to build them a house and to create a new livelihood for them as farmers, actually. Although these islands are quite close, like 80 kilometers or 100 kilometers from the coast, it's full Pacific. So for people, it's usually unaffordable to go to the mainland, because the prices of gasoline of the boats and what they have to pay per person is very high. So these are the families which have been evacuated now and who are being taught new skills to become farmers and build a new life, actually. Well, it's not only far away, it's just around the corner for anyone who is English in this room. This is actually north of Hull. It's the East Riding of Yorkshire, which has the fastest coastal erosion in Europe now. Has always been eroding, but it's never been eroding at such a speed, which is accelerated by the rising seas. And what I found really amazing was that all these villages have disappeared in the past already in the North Sea. They are disappearing now as well. But the people who are there, they are offered a council house sometimes, but they're not being compensated for the property they actually have. So most of them are homeowners, and they are being evicted. And they find themselves sometimes in an inland town in the UK here. This road was just there. This coastal road was only disappeared last year. Kiribati, not many people know where it is. It's right between Fiji and Hawaii, in the real middle of nowhere. It's actually very large. They have a very large area. It's almost the size of India. It's best known because it was the first country who reached the new millennium. And it's really, it looks like paradise. And but it was really a place where I also felt it's very scary. There is a flight, actually. This is the international runway, which they're about to lose. But the Fijians, they have a monopoly. So it's really, if you're local and you can't pay for an airfare, and trust me, the airfare from Amsterdam to Fiji was less than the airfare from Fiji to Kiribati, there's only a ferry once a year, which takes about 3 weeks. And the water is coming, is seriously coming. Obviously for this also I had to time very carefully, look at all the tide tables and make sure that I was there also when there was a high tide. The problem as a photographer is that you have to have visual proof that it's actually happening. You can't just talk about it. And it felt so remote, and people were telling me that I think 3 years ago there was a tsunami warning for Kiribati, and people actually really didn't know what to do. So they actually tied their kids to the palm trees. Luckily the tsunami never came, but now they just have this coming. The president of Kiribati is very outspoken. He's a real campaigner to make the world realize that this is currently happening. And he actually purchased recently a piece of land in Fiji, on the main island of Fiji. He purchased it from the Anglican Church. There was a slight problem because he went public and he said, we purchased land on Fiji, and that's where I'm going to move my people to. So he didn't discuss this with the Fijian government, so they were a little bit upset. Because don't forget, Kiribati is a country. There are several countries. We think we are only accumulating more countries in this world, but we are going to lose a few, like Kiribati, like Tuvalu, like the Maldives. So he said, okay, this land is only going to be used to grow crops for now. Well, I came back 2 weeks ago. I came back from Miami. I went there for the second time. I really had to convince the New York Times that Miami had to be included. The story about Miami was just visually very difficult, but story-wise it's staggering, I believe, because Miami cannot be saved. Most places, if there would be enough money, if there would be enough time, there's something you can do to at least prolong the lifetime of a country or a region. Miami has a problem, which is that it's built on limestone. And limestone is porous, so the Dutch experts have been there already, and everybody concluded that it cannot be saved. So at the same time, Miami is this city which is now, I think it's named now the richest city of the US. The real estate is just booming. I mean, most of the condo towers and real estate is sold to Latinos, Brazilians, Venezuelans. All experts say that Miami Beach and the Bay Area need to be evacuated by 2060, latest. When I was there last February, there were 21 condo towers under construction or being approved. And now it was 174 apartments ranging from 5 million to 25 million or more. I mean, for us, the Dutch, is like building outside of the dikes, right? There's these islands like Star Island, or like everybody lives there who has a little bit of money. Gloria Estefan, Julio Iglesias, and this guy who's the best paid plastic surgeon in the US. He fixed his wife, as you can see. So I said, Hochstein, Dr. Hochstein is his name, so I said, Doctor, what you going to do about this? And he said, I'm going to buy some pumps, and I'm going to be okay. And according to cartographers, the coast of Miami, or Florida actually, will be somewhere north of Orlando. In the future, Miami will be 200 miles from the US coast. We'll be closer to Havana, actually. The other problem, the cement they are using and the concrete is not seawater resistant. So these buildings might stand for a while, but the problem obviously is the infrastructure. This is high tide. This is not rain. This is seawater. So they're installing pumps like crazy. They hired a Navy SEAL to see if there was any problem with the drainage, but it was actually the sea. Thank you.